Hi everyone, welcome to the Postcard podcast. My name is Rebecca. Greetings! Welcome to the very first episode of the Postcard podcast. I'm so excited. Today we're just going to have a little introductory episode and talk about why I started the podcast, my quarter life crisis, the reason behind the name The Postcard, and just a little bit more about me so that you guys have a feel for who I am and what the podcast is going to be about. Obviously, since I mentioned I had a quarter life crisis, I'm 25 years old and I turned 25 in December, so it's been about 3 to 4 months now. And I'm at the point where it's finally setting in and I'm no longer struggling when people ask me how old I am. You know how normally you say the year prior or just a different age completely. And I am finally saying 25 instead of saying 24 or 20. So yeah, that's kind of crazy. Turning 25 definitely hit me a lot more than I expected it to, especially the months leading up to it. But I think I've finally accepted the fact that I'm 25 just because I am finally putting in a lot of work into who I am and working on my progress to becoming who I want to be. And that has made me okay with time passing and my goals. I'm originally from Italy, but I moved to Florida when I was about 3 years old, and ever since then I've just moved back and forth the majority of my life. It's always been between Florida and my hometown in Italy, and then another city in Italy as well. I moved back to Italy the first time in 3rd grade, and then I moved back again to Florida for 4th grade, and then moved back again to Italy, but this time the different city, not my hometown, from 7th grade to 9th grade, and then in 10th grade came back to Florida and have been here ever since. Growing up, though, I was always in Italy. I remember spending a lot of time there. I went there every summer for about 2 to 3 months. Basically, the entire summer that I wasn't at school, I would spend in Italy, and also went back sometimes for Christmases, depending on the year, really. And so I definitely have experienced a lot about life in both places and experienced a lot of culture shock and the differences in culture, lifestyle, everything. And I'm going to talk more about that in depth in the future in another episode because it's just something I find really interesting and hopefully a lot of people find interesting as well, whether you've related to it or just think it's something fun to learn about. It's weird because my accent when I speak English doesn't really have like a dialect or a place that it stems from. I feel like it's a very just standard accent when I speak English, and the same goes for when I speak Italian. It doesn't have any dialect from my hometown. It's just a standard Italian accent. It's not me speaking Italian with an American accent, but it's just me speaking with a very standard Italian accent. And there was a time when I was younger that I had an American accent speaking in Italian. And I'm sure at the very beginning of my life probably had an Italian accent speaking in English. But then slowly, as I just spoke it more often in like day-to-day life, those accents started to go away, and it's just been very standard, just no dialect towards my accent, which is really weird in a sense because a lot of people, especially from Italy, have an accent from where they are from, and mine is just very standard. I had actually wanted to move back to Italy for the longest time, since about probably 11th or 12th grade, but just never did because I had decided to finish high school here instead of continuing to go back and forth, especially because in Italy, high school is 5 years, not 4 years. So I was like, let me do the 4 years. And I just thought it would be easier if I finished high school and then moved. Then when I did finish high school, I was attempting to, but was struggling financially. So then I just decided to go into college and keep moving forward with my education. But I did college online, so I thought that I could always try to move and keep staying in college while doing it online. And I did college online before COVID. I have been doing online school since half of 11th grade for various personal reasons. And eventually I was about to move back. I went there for my 21st birthday in December and had tried the process of actually moving there to finish school while online and living there for a little bit so I could, I don't know, just experience life in Italy again. I felt like that was something that I was really missing and I just really wanted to. And then COVID hit. COVID in March 2020, and that was actually when I had planned exactly to go back. Like I said, I went in December for my birthday, and then I came back and I had the intention of going mid-March, and then it was COVID. So just kind of had to deal with that and stay a little bit longer. And I ended up kind of just becoming more comfortable in my life here. I kept going to school. I found a more permanent job. I had always had small little jobs here and there, but this was a job that I found at a coffee company as a barista, and it was just something more permanent that I actually really liked. And I've been at that job now for about 3 years and moved my way up from barista to trainer to supervisor in that time. And here we are. That takes us to today. Also, what I mean by permanent job is like a real job, one that I wanted to keep and progress in, move my way up in, and actually do good at. Whereas I feel like other jobs that I've had in the past, I didn't necessarily care that much. Obviously, I cared because they were a job and I'm responsible in that way. But I didn't care in the sense that if I needed to quit them, I wasn't upset about it. If I had to leave that job or if something happened, I just didn't really care about the position itself because it wasn't something that interested me. Whereas this job at the coffee company was actually something that I really, really enjoyed. Since the beginning of 2024, crazy that we're already in 2024, it feels like it was 2016 just yesterday, but since the beginning of the year, I've really been prioritizing my health, both mental and physical. I've been going to a lot of doctor's appointments for issues that I have about like stomach issues, headaches. I get migraines like nonstop, and going to therapy once to twice a week, depends on the week and if my therapist thinks that I should do another session that week. I feel like I've really changed my lifestyle to prioritize how I'm feeling, and in the year prior, especially the entire of 2023, I definitely didn't prioritize my health. I prioritized school and my job and friends and other people before I prioritized my health, and it got to a point at the end of the year, around my birthday in fact, when I just knew that I had to stop and I had to start prioritizing my health because the issues just kept getting worse. I've also been working on getting better sleep, and that's something I've been dealing with for a few years, but it's always a struggle to fall asleep and to wake up. And when I wake up, I always feel or not always, but the majority of time I feel really groggy and nauseous and dizzy and have a headache immediately in the morning, which is not fun. And then throughout the night, having a peaceful sleep because I have a lot of anxiety dreams and nightmares. So even if I get some nights and I get 7 hours of sleep, it might not be a peaceful sleep, or vice versa. I'll have a somewhat peaceful sleep and maybe no nightmares or bad dreams that night, but I will only sleep about 3 hours. So that's something I've been trying to deal with in therapy, and hopefully I can see some progress. I've seen a little, but definitely not the best sleep still. I guess I could say my quarter life crisis started in August 2023 when I graduated university. I graduated with a master's in public administration, and basically I did a 4+1 program. So that means that during the last year of my bachelor's, I was completing the first year of my master's. And for my bachelor's, I double majored in international relations and criminal justice, which means that for 1 year, I was basically doing 3 majors all at once, which was insane and was very mentally exhausting, as you can imagine. I was also doing a certificate for my bachelor's, and I also did a certificate for my master's as well. And during this year, it was actually the year that I transitioned at my job from being a barista to a supervisor. So it was really a lot at once, I think, and then I was just so involved in my life and just on autopilot between school and work and personal stuff that then when I graduated and that one thing went away, it's when a lot of things hit me. I started also to try to find a job in my field for public administration and international relations. And I actually started to do that during my last year of my master's. But I struggled. I really struggled to find a job in my field. And then once I graduated, like I said, it just hit me like a ton of bricks that so much time had passed. And I started freaking out about what I was going to do and what I hadn't done. And it was really what I hadn't done that was freaking me out the most, of all these goals that I had in mind and realizing that I hadn't completed them yet, but I'm at the age that I assumed I was going to have completed them. I honestly just felt so young and stuck at an earlier age. And I've always had this feeling of being stuck at an earlier age for the longest time. I would say around 18 years old is when that feeling started to first come up for me. And when I was 18, I just felt like I was stuck at 16. And then I just kept aging. And it was like I was turning 19, 20, 21, but I still felt 16. And now I'm at the point where at 25, I feel at least about 21. But for the longest time, I did still feel like I was 16, 17, and I just kept growing up, and it was really scary. And that's something that I've had be really scary and an upsetting feeling for a really long time in the last few years. And actually, after COVID, when everybody started saying that they felt like they were stuck in 2 years prior, I selfishly was really happy about that, because I was like, oh, somebody realizes how I feel. Obviously, wasn't happy about COVID, but I was happy that other people felt the way that I felt, and because I always felt that way of being stuck in years behind. And whenever I would, in the past, explain it to people, nobody would really understand, and they would think that it was only a me thing and it wasn't normal. So I didn't feel like it was normal for a long time, and then everyone started to feel that way as well. And I'm happy that now I've definitely feel like I've aged and I'm closer in my mind to the age that I actually am. And that's not to say that I don't feel 25. I do feel 25 mentally, but it just feels like stuck at an earlier age, because I guess it's because I feel like I didn't accomplish all the things that in my head when I was younger I thought I was going to accomplish at 25. So my brain is being like, oh, well, you're younger because you didn't accomplish all the things that you wanted to accomplish by this age, which was unrealistic, probably goals that I had as a kid. And also, this is also a reason why I had wanted to go back to Italy before COVID, because I felt like if I had gone back to Italy, maybe I could feel like I was living a little bit more of my life. I felt like I wasn't experiencing everything that I wanted to experience living here in Florida, whereas the lifestyle in Europe is very different. And if I was living in Italy and experiencing that lifestyle and being around my old friends, that I would feel the age that I felt when I had left, or feel the age that I actually am supposed to be, if that makes sense. And obviously, having that feeling of being stuck in limbo for a lot of years of my life was really hard, and that's something that I dealt with. And the limbo kind of stopped around the time that I started to feel more comfortable in my life in Florida, and that was when I got more friends and found the job that I said that was my real job that I'm in now. But then the autopilot kicked in, And around October, after I had graduated, is when I was like, wait a minute, I'm still not in the place that I wanted to be. And I started reevaluating my life because I realized that from being stuck in limbo, then I got stuck in comfortable. And I wasn't stuck in limbo and not accomplishing anything, but I was stuck in comfortable and not accomplishing anything and accomplishing the goals that I had wanted to accomplish for my entire life. And a toxic trait of mine is perfectionism and putting way too much pressure on myself. And I've definitely been this way for as long as I can remember. I've always put just a lot of pressure on myself and wanted everything to be quote unquote perfect, which perfect doesn't really exist. And deep down, I know that perfect doesn't exist, but it was still, or is still, something that I look for and want to have and obtain. So I put this pressure on myself to obtain this sense of perfect that I have, even though realistically I know that perfect doesn't exist, which is so frustrating because it's like, I know that perfect doesn't exist, but I still want it. And it's that knowing that you know that it doesn't exist, but still wanting it is so frustrating because it's like, why can't you just not? Why can't you just not? Because why do you still try to seek something that you know and you have admitted to knowing that doesn't actually exist? Yet, this is how my brain works. And it's really harmful to myself and my mental health because I will constantly be negative to myself and devalue my progress if it's not exactly how I imagined it or want it to be. So, in the months leading up to my birthday, after my graduation, I had started to think about all of the goals I hadn't achieved that I wanted to achieve before I turned 25. Instead of what I honestly should have been thinking about, what would have been better for me to have been thinking about was the goals that I did achieve. And even though they weren't goals that I had necessarily had for a long time, they were still goals, short-term goals that I did achieve before turning 25, or not even necessarily before I turned a certain age, but just in general that I have achieved. And looking at all the progress that I have made through the past few years. But no, I started to just have so much anxious thinking about what I didn't do. And that was my quarter life crisis. One thing about me is that when I was a kid, instead of playing Barbies or marriage or anything like that, which I don't know if kids actually played pretend marriage or pretend house or those types of things, but I never did that personally. What I pretended was that I had a career. I always pretended that I owned a business. A lot of the times I pretended my mom was a restaurant manager, so a lot of the times I pretended I was a waitress at a restaurant or a barista at a coffee shop. And I had like a little apron and a little notepad, and I would go around my house just taking people's orders. Or I would also pretend that I was the editor-in-chief of the New York Times or just an entrepreneur and had a bunch of businesses. That's what I always played and dreamt of when I was a kid. And I also had a very specific goal that after I graduated university, I would travel and that I would take a trip for 1 to 3 months and I would travel all throughout Europe, visiting different places in Europe. Or if I couldn't, because as a slightly realistic kid at least, I knew that to various cities throughout Europe alone was probably not the most realistic. So I focused it more on traveling for only a month to just Ireland. And I had the dream of spending a month in Ireland after I graduated and taking that solo trip, renting a car, and just driving across Ireland. And it's a dream that I thought of really often. It's something that really kept me going. Whenever I was bullied throughout high school, I kept thinking it's okay because when I graduate college, I'm going to go to Ireland for a month. And when I was in college crying from how much work I had and how everything that I was studying, or not everything, but a lot of the stuff I was studying was very heavy topics, and it really got to me emotionally, especially the criminal justice. And when I was crying, I just kept thinking it's okay because I'm going to go to Ireland for about a month after I graduate. And when it was really hard work and finals and had to push through, I just kept thinking about that trip. So it's really what kept me going, what I looked forward to. And suddenly I had realized I had forgotten about it. An idea that I had in the front of my mind so consistently turned into a little speckle in the back of my mind that I rarely thought about, and that I so rarely thought about that I didn't even put it into plan to actually do it when it was the time. And that's when I realized I wanted to do something. I wanted to make a change, and I needed to step out of my comfort zone and this autopilot that I was in for the past year. And that takes us to now, and I knew I was ready to start making changes in my life, and I started working towards those changes and focusing, like I said, on my physical and mental health. I got back into therapy because I've been in therapy since I was about 14, but on and off. Actually, maybe even a little bit younger, but really on and off. It was never very consistent. I've never done it weekly. And with this therapist now, I've been recently diagnosed with OCD and PTSD. And I was diagnosed with panic disorder and general anxiety disorder when I was 14 for the first time. Mental health is something that's always really been important to me and relevant in my life, and I've always wanted to be an advocate for ending the stigma around mental health. So that's something that I will definitely talk about a lot more in my podcast. Getting to the reason why I started the podcast, I have always wanted to have one ever since I was little. I just thought it would be really cool. It was one of those dreams that I had that weren't something that I actually wanted to do, but something that I thought was really cool. I remember watching that 70s show, and one of the characters, Donna, worked at a radio station. I always thought it would be just so cool to be a radio host, and that kind of transitioned into having my own podcast. Then, while in therapy, I started working on some of the behaviors that were harmful to my mental health, such as bad eating, sleeping, realizing where my perfectionism comes from and why I'm so hard on myself, like I mentioned earlier. And I figured out it's because of a fear of death that I have, and not death in the sense of dying, but death as in what happens after you die, not the afterlife, more so what happens on Earth after you die and how you're remembered. Ever since I was little, starting from when my grandmother passed away, it's always in childhood that it starts, isn't it? But yeah, when my grandmother passed away, it started making me think about life and death from a very early age. I don't remember how old I was, but I believe I was about 6 or 8 years old. Definitely not 10 yet, in the single digits of age. And I thought a lot about what happens after you die, in the sense of where you are, where the person who dies is. Hopefully I can explain this in a way that makes sense. But it's this idea that when you die, how do you remember Earth, or how does the world keep moving forward? Because obviously you're gone from this Earth, but the only way you know that Earth is moving forward is because you're in it. So when you aren't in it because you've passed away, how does Earth keep going, if that makes sense? And I know that Earth will keep going because obviously we know a bunch of people who have passed away. It's an unfortunate cycle of life, and people pass away every single day, and people are born every single day. But it's this concept of how Earth and life exists because you exist, or you're thinking of Earth and life existing because you are existing. And it's before we're born, we didn't experience anything prior to that. So now that we're dead, how is life still going forward? It's really complicated because I don't know how to explain it or which terminology to use to explain this concept. But basically, I think about how until we're born, we aren't existing. We don't know how things on Earth have been existing, but then we are born and Earth has a history, obviously. And we learn about this history through textbooks and material things and people and stories and art and literature, painting, music, all of this. And we learn all of this as we are aging and as we are existing in the Earth, even if we didn't experience it firsthand. But Earth still existed, and we know that Earth existed because of the proof that it did. But then when you die and Earth keeps going, Earth exists for us currently from our own minds. But if we die, then how does Earth keep going? Hopefully that made sense. I feel like it might have to some people. But basically, I started thinking about that when I was younger, and that really scared me. And I realized that people are remembered through things that are permanent on Earth. And this idea of permanence became really important to me because it's how I felt I could be remembered when I pass away. And I knew that I would pass away, and I was okay, and I accepting that eventually I will die when I'm older, or whenever it happens that I die. And I'm okay with it, but it's more so being remembered. And if I'm not remembered is what is scary or upsetting to me. And the people who are remembered are those who take part in art and literature, painting, movies, books, and all of that. So I knew I wanted to make something permanent in the world so that I could be remembered and that fear can be at ease. And that's when I started to have all of this pressure on myself, because I felt like the only way that I would be able to make something permanent was if I was perfect. And so it just was me getting to that point of I have to be perfect so that I can leave something behind to be remembered by. And despite me being a perfectionist and putting a lot of pressure on myself, I am through and through a procrastinator. And that duality is something really hard to deal with internally, because I would create I would think of so many dreams and goals that I wanted to do, and I would develop a specific goal, but then through procrastination and my fear of failure, I always just had this idea that it would never end up working out or whatever it was, or yeah, I have this whole entire idea mapped out to 100%, but it's not going to work. Or I put in the first step and then I don't see immediate result, and I'm thinking, well, I suck. It sucks. It's never going to work. I shouldn't work on it further, because why waste my time? Because it's never going to work out. And then I waste my time and I'm a failure. And then if I work on it more, then I'm more of a failure. So I need to stop immediately. But realistically, you're not going to get results immediately. And you just have to keep working on it. I was constantly looking for an opportunity of permanence to come to me instead of just creating something that was permanent for myself. And this idea that if I didn't have immediate results from one of my goals or actions, that I was a failure was really what kept me procrastinating. And one time my therapist told to me that it's okay if I'm a work in progress and that everything I'm doing is in progress. And that's when I started to kind of look at things differently and realize that, yes, I'm not going to have my goal immediately achieved tomorrow. Things need work. You need to work on things to achieve them. And just because I'm a work in progress doesn't mean that they're never going to happen. I would always have this thought that something won't ever happen if it's taking a long time, but that's not realistic. So I became content with this idea of me being a work in progress and realized that I had to push past my procrastination and make my own opportunity for permanence instead of waiting for it to come to me. So that's where the podcast comes in. The podcast is my first step towards permanence. In the past, I would have normally created a concept, let's say for the podcast, created a concept for the podcast, did a bunch of research, found all the equipment that I needed, and then given up or pushed it aside and been like, I'll work on it next month or tomorrow. And then tomorrow would turn into 2 weeks. And then the month would turn into 3 months, 4 months, 15 years gone by, you know? And this time I decided to just do it. And I gave myself a short-term little deadline, and here we are. So why is the podcast called The Postcard? Well, I feel that the postcard is vintage but timeless, and that timeless ties into permanence, which is, like I just explained, the whole reason why I wanted to start a podcast. And also because I do plan on moving eventually. That is another goal of mine for this year that I would like to actually set into motion. And so this podcast is like a virtual postcard to my friends and my mom. And finding a place that feels like home and a city that I can call home is also another goal of mine for 2024, because I've always felt a lack of comfort in either place that I've been. I never truly felt like I could call Florida home or my hometown, coincidentally, in Italy home, because I always felt a stranger in either place due to the back and forth. And I'll talk about that more in another podcast episode. My goals for this podcast is to eventually do video podcast episodes. And also, when I do move, I'd love to meet with random people that have also moved and traveled throughout their lives and talk to them a little bit about that experience and culture shock and what they've gone through. And I would love to have those conversations and learn more about people and everybody's cultures. Also, side note, a personal thing about me is that I love baking. Baking just truly makes me feel happy. If I'm depressed, I go immediately to baking and music. And I recently baked these protein bars because all of the protein bars in stores, I just don't like. They're either too sweet or have really bad things in them, or they just are gross. I don't really like the taste of them. So I made my own protein bars, and I have to say, they're so good. I'm so proud of myself. That was just a little side note, but I really love them. They're delicious. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode and got to know a little bit about me and the postcard. Please send me any ideas that you guys would like for me to talk about in future episodes. I do have a lot of ideas of my own, but if you guys want to hear me talk about anything specific, let me know either on the poll on Spotify or on Instagram. I plan on having a few of my friends on some episodes in the future, so I'm really excited about that. You can follow me on Instagram for the podcast. It's at the Postcard Podcast. And mine personal is at Reb in Progress. So REB in progress. And in that account, I started because I want to share, like I said, how I'm a work in progress and share a lot about working towards my goal and working to better myself. So I'm going to start posting a lot more on that account. Next week's episode, I'm going to talk about 25 things I learned turning 25 and 25 goals I have for my next 25 years. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for listening. I can't wait for next week. Talk to you soon.